Durban is the author of 4 books of fiction, a collection of short stories all set about with fever trees, and 3 novels, The Laughing Place, So Far Back, and The Tree of Forgetfulness. The New York Times Book Review hails her as superb, a forceful novelist. Her short fiction has been published in many magazines and anthologies, anthologized in the Best American Short Stories of the Century, and News Stories from the South, the year's best, as well as the Pushcart Prize, Best of the Small Presses. She's the recipient of an NEA Fellowship and a Whiting Writers Award, as well as a James Michener Creative Writing Fellowship from the University of Iowa. She has received the Crazy Horse Fiction Award and the Goodhart Prize from Shenandoah. Her novel, So Far Back, received the Lillian Smith Award for Fiction. She's a founding editor of 5 Points magazine and served for 5 years as fiction editor for 5 Points. Born in Aiken, South Carolina, she attended the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. She teaches at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where she is the Doris Betts Distinguished Professor of Creative Writing. After her reading, she'll answer questions and will be glad to sign books for you. The bookstore has copies of her books for sale, including her powerful new novel, The Tree of Forgetfulness, which many of my students have been reading these last couple of weeks. Tomorrow she'll be interviewed by grad students at 10:30 a.m. in Patterson 448. Please welcome Pam Durban.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here for many reasons, not the least of which is after a very bizarre plane ride today involving delays because the toilets weren't working on the plane. And so there ensued this idea that we would have to stop in Chattanooga. We could all get on the plane, but we'd have to stop in Chattanooga to go to the bathroom on the way here, which didn't happen because the stewardess was supposed to assess the passengers outside of Chattanooga to see if anybody had to get off and go to the bathroom. And she didn't, and so we came on to Memphis. I mean, it was surreal. It was bizarre. Probably one of the most bizarre flight delays I've ever experienced. So I'm very happy to be here. And I thank Carrie and John and the MFA program and everyone who was involved in bringing me here. I thought tonight that I would read something that's something of a departure for me. At a certain point, I mean, I'm pretty tired of writing about the South. I'm pretty tired of having people die in my stories and dealing with that. So I thought I'd write about another kind of rite of passage for those of us for those of us who are parents, and for those of you who are not parents yet. Your parents probably went through this. At the moment when a child's sexuality begins to emerge in their lives, which is always a telling thing for parents and a test for parents. So this story is called Forward, Elsewhere, Out. It's about 15 pages long, so it'll take me 30 minutes or so to read it, and then as Carrie said, I'm happy to answer questions about this or anything else. A rainy night in early October, her favorite time of day and year, her favorite weather. She's never told anyone, not even her husband Thomas, how these dreary nights make the house feel like an outpost in a wilderness that begins just outside the door and goes on from there forever. When the kids were small, she'd left the kitchen door cracked open to let in the sound of the rain, hoping they'd listen. Tonight, out of habit, she's opened the door a crack, but she and Eli, the youngest, are the only two sheltering here. Thomas is rocketing around Japan on a high-speed train, negotiating a big contract for his most important client. Kate, her namesake daughter, is studying art history in Florence this semester. She is stirring a pot of chili when Eli jumps up to sit on the counter beside the stove the way he does when he wants to talk. They've always been close. "How are you this fine rainy evening?" she says. He watches her steadily through his hazel eyes, dark hair flopped down on his forehead, a shadow of hair on his upper lip. A line from a song drifts through her mind. "Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl." "You know, Mother," he says, "what Rachel and I do is our business." She can guess what business they mean to transact, but she keeps stirring the chili, staying calm. "Interesting," she says, marking her place in the conversation while she waits for a stronger answer to come to her. In another time, when he wasn't 16, and she was still his pal, his mom, she might have tried for a joke, but she's stung by the new formality of mother, and by the ambush, as if he's just made a surprise move in a long chess match, which, come to think of it, he has. This match, to keep Eli from learning what he's determined to find out, has been going on since their son at 13 had turned secretive and short-tempered, and her brother had urged them to break into his internet history. Sure enough, they'd found a few items there to paste in the scrapbook of 21st century childhood. First trip to a porn website, first chat room conversation. Thank you. They hadn't made a big deal about it. They'd moved the computer out of his room and into the den for a few months. And then she and Thomas had sat down and talked with Eli about the dangers of chatting with anonymous strangers, the ugly distortions of pornography. "He's curious," they said, and they bought him a book. It's perfectly natural, full of lined drawings of young people exploring their bodies and liking what they saw and felt. He kept it in a duffel bag under his bed, along with the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue he'd gotten from somewhere, as if, even though they bought the book for him, he still needed to hide it. She takes a deep breath, moves the spoon through the chili in a slow figure eight. "Well, of course it's your business, Eli," she says, stepping carefully from word to word. "Dad and I can't be your conscience." He ducks his head to hide a smile, and who can blame him? Conscience. Such a fussy old word deserves a smirk. It conjures up her grandmother's parlor. It nudges Jiminy Cricket onto the stage to sing his brave little song, "Always let your conscience be your guide." She remembers laughing with her women friends about the love they'd felt for their baby boys and the pleasure of being adored with such pure passion. She remembers the open eagerness of Eli's eyes, which seemed to register every ripple in his soul. She remembers holding him and feeling that the full share of life's happiness lay sleeping in her arms. Paging Dr. Freud, she said, "Why don't we just name them all Oedipus and get it over with?" She said that when Eli was 2, and she was the last one still nursing, a choice her friends told her that only the La Leche League would approve of. Now her friends are grieving that their sons have clammed up on them. "At least he's still talking to me," she thinks, staring down into the chili, swirling it slowly with the lopsided wooden spoon that Eli had hacked and sanded for her one year at summer camp. But it's time to face the facts. Rachel has her driver's license, not just a learner's permit like Eli. She can drive anywhere, anytime. At this moment, she is driving here in her silver Honda, to take Eli away with her to the dead-end streets and vacant lots that everyone's children know the way to. She remembers those places herself. A dirt road overlooking a quarry where she and her college boyfriend went to make out. The house of a friend whose parents were out of town where they'd spent their first night in bed together, which reminds her that someone's parents are always out of town. "How about talking to Dad?" she says. "Who?" He shrugs, looks away, mouth tightening, drums his heels against the cabinet door. She knows their son's opinion of Thomas's latest trip to Japan, his 3rd this year. In the saucepan, the chili bubbles thickly. She takes another deep breath, stirs it down, and hurries on. "Well, you're too young, Eli. Really, you are. Both of you. At least talk to Dad about it." Eli flinches. Then he recovers and looks back at her with a touch of what? Amusement in his eyes? "A talk?" he seems to say. "You want me to talk to Dad about sex? Do old people even have sex? When was the last time anyone thought of sex as a mystery that sons were ushered into by their fathers?" And did she really just say it? Talk about it? Doing it? She always hated that phrase, but making love sounds too hushed and precious for these loud, crude times. No, it is the right word for what the men and women were doing to one another on the websites Eli had visited, for what she sees every day in the middle school library, where she's in charge, but not really. On laptops quickly shut as she patrols the aisles between the long tables, on papers retrieved between classes from under those tables. Just this week, she'd found a much-handled picture of a naked girl with pierced nipples straddling a mirror. He checks his watch, jumps down from the counter. "Okay, later," he says. "No supper, Eli," she says. "I made this for you. Chili and cornbread when the weather turns cool, his favorite meal." "Gotta go." He kisses her on top of the head, pats her shoulder. She shrugs him off. "Okay," she says, managing her voice. "Be careful on the road. Tell Rachel she needs to slow down when it rains. The tires don't grip the pavement as well when there's water on the road," he finishes for her. "You've got money? I've got money." "Midnight, Eli," she says, "and you think about what I said." "By your leave, my lady mother," he says, bowing deeply, then swoops in to kiss her loudly on the cheek. "Be gone," she says, waving him away with the spoon. The front door closes, the front door locks. And she stirs her chili alone in this house on the edge of the world's wilderness, while the cold rain splashes onto the brick patio outside the kitchen door. The first time Thomas had called from Japan, he told her about flying over the Arctic Circle. He'd watched the trees thin out and disappear. Then they'd flown for hours over the polar ice cap. "You can't believe how much nothing there is up here," he said. Now as she eats a bowl of chili at the kitchen table, the newspaper folded and propped on the sugar bowl in front of her, she feels like she is the one flying alone over the empty vastness at the top of the world. But there's still hope. At least Eli has not gone out with the girl from up the street, the one in the tank top and the low-slung jeans, her eyes as darkly lined as a goddess from an Egyptian tomb, who'd come to the door the day after her family moved into the neighborhood last fall and asked for Eli by name. No, Eli is with Rachel, sweet, serious, honor society Rachel, in her pressed jeans and her polo shirt, with the pastel butterfly barrettes holding back her light blonde hair. Rachel, who volunteers to wash dishes, then scrubs the glasses inside and out and washes the bottoms of plates, while Eli clowns around the kitchen doing tricks with the dish towel and drying the dishes she hands him. They are such children still. At 1 a.m., the front door bangs open, and Eli heads straight for the refrigerator. He rummages there, assembles something with much rustling and ripping, clatter of ice cubes into a glass, carries the plate and glass into the dining room and flops down at his place at the table. She watches him from the couch in the darkened den just off the kitchen, where she's been sitting since midnight, clipping threads off of her chenille bathrobe and steadily aging, until by the time he comes in, she feels like some ancient creature brooding in its lair. Finally, she stands up from the couch, cinches the bathrobe tighter, because when rules are broken, someone must take charge, and she is the only grown-up here. She leans on the dining room door jamb with her arms folded, waiting, until Eli looks up from his plate. "Evening, Mother," he says from around a mouthful of sandwich, and she notes that his hair has been recently combed. Such a detective she's become. "You're late," she says, stops herself from saying "Mister," like a 50s mom. He nods, shrugs. "Sorry," he says, frowning at the sandwich. She waits for the excuse, something to show that the rules still matter here, and he knows he's broken one. Instead, the cell phone beside his plate rings, and he holds up a finger, just a second, as though he hates to interrupt her, but he has to take this call. He answers the phone, then turns away, but not before she sees the smile spread across his face. She knows that smile, the one that won't be dimmed, that turns your face into the movie screen where happiness is now playing. If you're lucky, you get to smile like that, hostage to joy, a few times in your life. She remembers smiling at Thomas that way on the day they got married, smiling helplessly at each newborn child. Before she can say more, Eli gets up from the table and walks out the back door into the yard. The rain has stopped, and under the dripping backyard oak, Eli paces and talks, smiles. She imagines that if she watches long enough, she'll see him start to dance. And so she turns away, a spasm gripping her heart that can't be jealousy, it can't be, but it is. Patience, she tells herself all the next day. Watch and wait. She will talk to Eli, she must. Like the happiness that spills into a smile, this need to talk, to teach, to matter, will not be denied. It is an occupational hazard of motherhood. But timing is everything. So she waits until the next evening when they're driving to pick up takeout from their favorite Chinese restaurant. She drives, and Eli lounges against the passenger side door, doodling swirls and spirals on the fogged-up glass, then erasing them with a swipe of his shirt sleeve. 10 minutes into the drive, his cell phone has rung twice, and he's had 2 happy conversations. Yep, sure am. Definitely. Not much longer. Okay, hello butterflies. Okay, bye. While he talks on the phone, she rehearses her speech. But every sentence she tries sounds like the God of the Old Testament thundering at his shivering creatures when he caught on to what they'd been up to in his garden. Who told thee thou wast naked? Why did you eat of the fruit of the forbidden tree when I would have kept you blind and happy forever? Finally, after he snaps his phone shut for the second time, when she figures she has a minute, 2 minutes tops before the phone rings again, she says, the thing is, Eli, I just don't want you and Rachel opening that door. She could have smacked herself in the forehead for that one. He looks at her as though he'd expected her to say something like that, as though she's become as transparent to him as he once was to her, all her little feints and dodges. He reaches across the seat, pats her arm. Mom, don't worry, he says, placating her with the mom. I'm not a horn dog. Well, that's reassuring, she says, while her inner grandmother, whose stuffy parlor they visited earlier for a lecture on conscience, explodes in righteous fury. Don't talk filth to me, boy, she says. If only she had her grandmother's words, or the words from the old Catholic Girls Manual to deploy with Eli, words to keep him close, or at least too scared to disobey, the way she'd been. She'd spent 8 years in Catholic school, steeping in the language of chastity and sin. When a boy whistled at her on the first day of 9th grade in public school, she ran and hid behind a tree. Her Christian brother still has that grip on his teenage daughter, or so he thinks. She has vowed to keep her virginity until marriage, and wears a promise ring, a white gold band set with crosses, love waits, engraved inside the band. But those words and promises, the faith her brother puts in faith, seem flimsy in the age of horn dogs and pierced girls in their mirrors. Later, after a silent dinner eaten out of cartons in front of the TV, Eli departs for his upstairs bedroom, and she goes into the kitchen where she wipes the counters and watches the clock and waits for Thomas to call. What she really wants right now is the man himself. She wants to lie down with him on their big bed in the dark and touch his face and hear him tell her not to be sad. She wants to hear Thomas's story again, the story of the only child who became his mother's little man after his father left them. And yet, he will say, when the time came, his mother packed him off to college. She let him go out into the world, where he found a wife and children to love. And he went on loving her too, giving back to her what she'd been willing to let him go away from her to find. Tonight, she'll have to settle for Thomas's voice. Exactly at 8, the phone rings, and she brings Thomas up to speed on the news from this side of the world. The missed curfew, the combed hair. What should I do, she whispers. He's quiet for a few seconds, and she rests in silence, waiting. Then in his calm, reasonable way, he says, I wish I was there with you. The simple kindness of those words throws a switch, and the words pour out. She tells him how old and weird she feels, whispering to him in Japan about how carefully their son has combed his hair. She tells him about the brooding creature she turned into the night she waited up for Eli, the euphemisms she blew like bubbles in the car on the way to the restaurant. If Thomas were here, they would laugh about her dark scenarios, and the laughter would lighten the darkness. Thomas, the only person on this whirling planet to whom she could tell this nightmare fairy tale in which she is the hag brooding darkly over the world that their son is launching himself so eagerly out into. She feels like a warden, she tells him, a guard patrolling the prison of safety and home that must be escaped for the new life of freedom and possibility and sex. Let's not forget sex, she says. Who wants to, Thomas says. Let me speak to him. While they talk, Eli paces in the upstairs hall, and she stays in the kitchen with the radio on so she can't hear. But when he hands the phone back to her, she learns that nothing has been said or will be except to her from far Japan. Relax, Thomas says. In his voice, she hears a residue of laughter. You can't change anything. They'll be all right. Remember that carrot and condom drill they did in sex ed class? I'd rather not, she says. Hurry home. I'm on my way. The night after the conversation with his father that changes exactly nothing, Eli hops up onto the counter beside the stove again while she cooks spaghetti, another favorite meal. She is not doing this to keep him home or away from Rachel, no. Rachel's been invited to her house for dinner because Eli's mother is an open-minded woman who accepts the world as it is, piercings, mirrors, and all. She looks forward to having Rachel at her table, where she will keep up her end of the conversation, then stand at the sink with the little blue butterflies holding black or blonde hair and wash the dishes and the glasses inside and out, same as always. She's about to ask Eli to set the table when he glances at his watch, the way people do when they can't wait to leave. Is that what's happening here? He wants to escape? He does, but she's the one who's making this personal. And in her quieter, saner moment, she knows that. Something like the movement of tides, the push of seasons, the urgency of birth itself is carrying him away. He's going where every cloud, leaf, and seed, every man, woman, and child goes, forward, elsewhere, out. He's not leaving her any more than he left her when he was born. And what is needed here is what every birth requires, surrender. Surrender, and maybe a ceremony to mark ends and beginnings, the way women in India practice letting go by giving up one precious object every year. Thomas says that in Japan, when a bullet train pulls into the station, the attendants line up and bow, as though the train were a god, the god of speed and change. Maybe she should bow to Eli, then let him fly. What's the hurry, Eli, she asks. Rachel's picking me up at 7. We'll grab something to eat before the movie. I thought you all were having supper here, she says. She wraps the spoon hard on the rim of the pot. The sauce flies up and splatters on the stove. I'm sorry, Mom. He says, I'm sorry, I forgot. And she sees in the slump of his shoulders the little boy who took every mistake to heart, gave his parents hand-colored cards full of apology and remorse. It's all right, Eli, she says, everybody forgets. But you know, I just don't want either of you to get hurt, she says, knowing she shouldn't, but like the smile that will be smiled, it can't be stopped. And what if Rachel gets pregnant, she says, have you thought about that? Mother, please, he says, his eyes dart around the room trapped. Don't make me sorry I talked to you in the first place. Well, the threat, that threat is what brings tears to her eyes at last, and once they're there, she can feel an ocean of them rising, rushing through the hole left by the arrow he's fired straight through her heart. They've always talked. Now he's threatening to take that away. She makes this rough shift from mom, playmate, buddy, to mother, spy, unwelcome guest. He doesn't need to leave his father. Thomas lives where Eli wants to go, out into the world of men, where motherhood is not a woman's highest calling, and this is only his first departure. Don't be late, she calls after him. Word, he says, and slams the door behind him. He comes in after 1 again, ignores her where she sits in the den watching a movie. He rummages through the pantry and refrigerator, then comes into the den carrying a bowl of cereal and sits down on the edge of the cushions at the far end of the couch, not looking at her. Late Marriage is the name of the movie, an Israeli film. She'd expected a comedy, which it's not, but now she's involved in the story and she wants to know how it will turn out. The movie is about a family that's desperate to get their son married. He's almost 40, still a bachelor, and the worry is that he always will be. But he will not marry any of the women his mother and father choose for him because he's secretly involved with a divorced woman with a child. When the family finds out, there's a terrible scene in which they crowd into the woman's apartment, mother, father, uncles, to demand that she give him up. An uncle even threatens the woman with a sword, but she stands up to the man's family even though he can't. When Eli comes in, the movie couple is cleaning up the mess. "What's this about?" he says, still not looking at her, spooning cereal into his mouth. She glances over at him. He hasn't bothered to comb his hair, as if it doesn't matter any longer what she knows or thinks. "A man whose family doesn't want him to be with the person he's with," she says, and sees the secret smile begin on his face. Oh, that story. As though he knows them all now. They're trying to stop him from seeing her, but he won't. "Is it any good?" he says. She can feel him trying to be buddies again, the way they used to be, settling in with a bowl of popcorn between them to watch an episode of Jackass, laughing together at the idiotic boys who rode their bicycles full speed into thorny hedges, then backed up and did it again. "It's all right," she says, darker than I expected though. And then, suddenly, the couple in the movie falls onto the bed. If she'd seen it coming, she would have turned off the TV, but it happened too fast, and now she can't move. The sex on the screen is not like the usual movie sex, lush music and firelight playing over a soft-focused tangle of bodies. This scene plays out in a room harshly lit by an overhead light on a bed with rumpled white sheets, where two people begin to kiss and touch and take off their clothes. She waits for the lights to dim, for the camera to look away, but it continues to stare, a stare without any pretense of romance, to soften the view. Eli stops crunching his cereal. He sits completely still, his face turning red. She wishes she could say something to help him understand what he's seeing, the way she did when they watched the Titanic go down together, when Frodo lost the ring. And then it comes to her. She sees it as clearly as if the movie she's watching is about them. In this scene, the boy's not leaving after all. In fact, he stepped right into her world, and even though they live in the same world now, because they do, it is forbidden that they talk about what they both know. From now on, they will surround themselves with widening circles of privacy, with borders clearly marked to discourage trespassing. He stands up, cereal bowl in one hand, wipes the other down the side of his jeans. "I know what you're thinking," he says. It takes her a few seconds to guess that he suspects that she's picturing him and Rachel as the couple on the bed. She almost laughs when she realizes that she's never, not once, imagined that, pacing off the first few yards of her own distance now. "Actually, son," she says, "you don't." Thank you. So, I'm happy to answer any questions about this or the Tree of Forgetfulness or anything else you'd like to talk about.
I've always got questions.
Yeah.
I want you all to ask what you like. Can you just talk about how you started as a writer? Did you write as a child?
Yes, I did. But then, all the way through, I stopped writing. I mean, I wrote a little bit in college. I wrote really bad poetry in college. Familiar, right? And didn't, even though I was at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, which had a very fine writing program, I really didn't take too many classes. I worked on the literary magazine. I sort of stayed away from it. And then I didn't much write for the next 8 years. I mean, I worked as a journalist. I did a book of oral histories. I mean, I did other kinds of writing, but I didn't do my own writing, and then started to again First started writing poetry, then started writing stories again, and then decided to go back to school and get an MFA. But it was 8 years of sort of stumbling around in the world, making good and bad choices, which I don't regret, by the way. I don't think it's a bad way to go. You know?
I think it's stumbling necessary.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you don't get yourself into something that you can't get yourself out of, you know, then like prison or something. You'll probably be all right. And I don't regret any. I mean, it was all grist for the mill. Yeah.
Speaking of grist for the mill, I was just curious how you came to creating this particular story that you just read, which was lovely. How did you begin writing it? Can you talk a little about the process of writing it?
Well, I guess I probably have to disclose too much
No.
to do that. I mean, I guess it's sort of loosely based on the moment when my son stepped down off the bus where he'd gone to visit his girlfriend in Asheville and said something like, "Guess what, Mom, it's too late." And that, you know, and I started thinking about that. I mean, it's just a weird thing, you know, what sort of involvement do we have in what our kids are doing? But we do, you know, that we do. We want to keep them safe. We want them not to be, you know, make terrible mistakes or end up with a, you know, a person who's going to hurt them in some way. And so it's protected, but it's weird too. And that's where it started. I was trying to puzzle through that set of feelings. I mean, in one way, you have absolutely no business saying anything to someone, but when a child brazenly says something like that, I think you have the right then to respond. Yeah.
Oh, you mentioned that you went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there and maybe how they influenced your development as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because I went there. That's another thing I don't regret at all. I mean, the timing was just right, and I think timing is everything in going to a graduate program. I mean, I think you have to be ready to do that, and I felt like I was ready to take advantage of everything that was there. And I was also old enough, and I wouldn't say confident enough, because what writer is ever really that confident, except raging egomaniacs among us. But I was good. I could sort out in the workshops, which were often brutal, what was useful and what was not, in terms of what people were saying. I mean, I felt like I had enough sense of what I was trying to do and wanted to do, you know, that I could sort that out. But it was just also being in that climate, having 2 years to write. You all know, 2 years to write. You've got a little tiny bit of money that you can try to stretch it out, and you're there just to write. You know, and at Iowa, I mean, being the program that it was, every single week, some major writer was there. You know, Raymond Carver was there, John Cheever was there. I mean, everybody who's ever written a short story was there. You know, agents came through, people. I mean, it was a major kind of hub for writing, and I was really happy to be there. I read constantly while I was there, which was as important as anything else I did. Somebody would mention a writer, and I'd go to the library and find their books and read them, and really start to read them as a writer. You know, looking at it. Well, that passage really moved me. That paragraph really. How did they do that? How did that writer do that? What did they orchestrate? How did they orchestrate that scene? So that I was really moved by that moment. So it was really valuable.
I feel like these kind of readings kind of accomplish that for us. It's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to hear stuff, to hear stories and novels read. Don't you think? I mean, I think language is made to be heard. Which is, if it sounds, I love it, I think it was Elmore Leonard who said that in his talking about writing, if it sounds written, I get rid of it. That's good, yeah. It starts to sound written instead of, this is just the story talking. Yeah, somebody else? Yes?
Who inspires you?
Who inspires me? I mean, what writers inspire me?
What writers, what people? Who?
That's a good question. I read pretty constantly, so a lot of writers inspire me. Our great Nobel laureate now, Alice Munro, inspires me. Marilyn Robinson inspires me. Buddhism inspires me. There's a great book, by the way, if you're on that side of the spectrum of spiritual thought. There's a great book called One Continuous Mistake that's writing, the practice, treating writing as a practice. Like the Buddhists have practices that you do, and this is treating writing as a practice, which removes a lot of the, oh my God, I've got to publish before I'm 25 or 30 or I'm going to die. It removes some of that and makes it into the practice itself is the thing that matters. So her four, in Buddhism there are the four noble truths. Life is suffering, but there is an end to suffering, and how suffering is ended. Well, her four noble truths are writing is a process. Because writing is a process, you can't know until the end of it what you've done. I forget the third one, but the fourth one is, if writing is your practice, then the only way to fail is not to write, which is really liberating. It makes you able to write badly, truthfully, right? Everybody writes. We all write badly. You have to be able to do that. Yes?
I thought of this. You ever just sit down and write and some voice or something, it just takes you and you write, like you don't know where you're going, or like, where is that?
Yeah, sometimes. Those are gifts of grace, when that happens. But I have started doing, and I really recommend this process. I've finished one notebook already of this, and I'm into my second notebook, a 10-minute writing practice. Every day, 10 minutes, that's it. Everybody can spare 10 minutes, right? And you just sit down, it's completely limited, it's freedom, because you write about whatever comes up to write about. How your mother burned the eggs when you were a kid, 50 smells that you remember from your childhood, all the houses that you lived in, all the dogs that you've all known and loved. And it's really, really liberating. I just finished, the 153-page little journal with this writing practice. And I think it gets you, it does another important thing, which is it gets you to the desk. It gets you to just getting in the habit of sitting there and waiting and inviting that moment to happen. And the more you do it, I think the invitation becomes stronger to whatever it is that comes to you.
What about research? We do a lot of research
Yeah.
about
Yeah. For both So Far Back and the Tree of Forgetfulness, I did a whole lot of research, and I love it. It's my favorite kind of research, which is just rummaging through archives, reading. The research for the Tree of Forgetfulness was especially important to me because that core of that story, some of you read that, is that right? Is actually something that it was based. My family was that family. That horrible description at the beginning of the wound, the coroner's report, of the wounds on the three the three bodies was signed by my grandmother's brother, one of my grandmother's brothers, who was the coroner's physician at the time. So it had a particular sort of urgency to it to me to try to put those pieces together. But for so far back, I mean, I went to Charleston over and over and over again. I did research in all the archives there. I walked around. Some of the most important research I did was just walking around the streets of Charleston, feeling what the air felt like and smelling it. You know, because it's those details that give us the life of a place. You know, the other thing I learned about the 10-minute writing exercise, too, is it teaches you a really valuable thing, and that's that you have to start small. If you try to start big, what happens? I mean, you get overwhelmed by it, and it tends to kind of get into abstraction. But if you start really small, you know, with one detail. We had, you all know the writer Ron Rash? He was just at UNC, and he was great. He was talking about how everything he writes begins with an image, pretty much. So do you know his novel, Serena? Soon to be a major motion picture with Jennifer Lawrence as Serena. It began with an image of a very complex novel about a very interesting, complex sort of Lady Macbeth character in the timber industry in North Carolina at the turn of the century. He said it began with an image of a woman on horseback. That's what he saw in his mind's eye, and he just followed that out, you know, to see where it would take him. So he's really against planning out story, you know, planning things out, more like letting them happen. And it's messy. Not going to be perfect the first time. Well, it is. Somebody else? Yes.
I noticed that, like from what you read and in your book, True Forgiveness, that all the characters have very distinct voices. Like I can always tell who's talking and under something. Could you explain like how you develop the voice of your characters and how you keep them distinct?
Well, thank you for that, for say that. I don't know if that it's a conscious choice. I mean, I think it is, in revision it is. Once I feel like I know, and I guess this maybe gets back to your thing, you know, it's the voice is something you have to hear in your head, I think. And so usually that's what I try to do, is just to hear those voices and to let them develop their own sort of sound and vocabulary. And then when I go back and do the next drafts of it, in this case of the book, you know, I just keep working to know that character more so that that voice becomes stronger. Does that make sense? Somebody else? Yes.
One, I detested liver, but...
Detested liver?
Liver,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Detested liver because in part of her voice.
Uh-huh.
Honesty. We can talk about that later.
Yeah. So, well, tell me, what was it about her voice?
I thought that it was, well, dishonest.
Yeah.
In everything that she was just too deliberate. Too deliberate to be genuine, and because she wasn't genuine, she wasn't trustworthy.
Yeah.
It was a visceral reaction, I think, to her character in relationship to all the other characters. So yes, that was actually an Evangel compliment for writing. For writing a fully realized.
Yeah. And I don't mean to say, yeah, that's what I wanted you to feel, but it is in a way. I mean, she was that way. I mean, but I also have, I feel like I have to have, as a writer, a certain sympathy for no matter who they are. You know, to allow them to be, you know, I don't want to falsify them in the other direction to either make them, you know, saccharine or sweet or, you know, and so I meant for her to be, I mean, she's sort of the pivot in that way, and she can't be honest with herself or with anybody else, you know, what she knows, what her husband has done, and, you know, she can't. So.
Oh, yeah, another reason to test her. But no,
Well,
actually,
you
I
think everybody's always honest?
No, no, maybe that's what I think is, and this is a gift of yours. I'm listening to the excerpt that you just read. Again, you can not only capture a voice. I was very surprised that you would capture just the rhythm of Black people in speech so very well. Yay.
Thank you.
But then also that honesty you do convey it. You can't thoroughly detest her. Maybe I detest her because I do recognize that this is very, very common, very, very human, but it's something I recognize in myself, maybe in other people. But we don't like it in any form, we just don't like it.
Yeah.
So you throw it up in our faces, you know, face in the mirror. It's the most dangerous of the Jedi trials. But no, my actual question was, I do have a question.
Isn't that the most dangerous of the Jedi trial?
I think that's the one that Anakin failed or something, so, you know, enter Darth Vader. But if only he would have faced the mirror, right? But are your works, okay, I thought I had the question. Do you rely on personal experience, the relationship between your life, your experiences, and your characters? Again, the Tree of Forgetfulness is based on your own family, your history. And then this story, this was something that your son, a comment from your son, sort of set into motion. Is it?
Yeah.
Are you generally that brave and
Well, I don't know if it's
vulnerable?
brave. I mean, I don't think of it as brave, vulnerable. It's just it's what somebody, some poet that we just had come read at UNC talked about it. I thought it was great. He said we all have our assigned subject matter.
So you're a subject?
So find your own assigned subject matter. And somebody said, well, how do you know if it's assigned? He said, because it is, you know, it's assigned. What's your subject matter? You know? And where do you find it? I mean, so yes, so often those things are, or something I'll hear, it won't necessarily be a personal experience, although sometimes that's often a starting point. But it goes on from there. For instance, in the Tree of Forgetfulness, I'm interested to know what you thought about the curious grandchild.
Oh, well, we all suspected that in the beginning. We had a nice conversation about that. We knew.
Suspected.
Yeah, it was you.
Yeah, because one of the that book nearly just killed me. I mean, it was just, I literally tore it down to the ground and rebuilt it at least 4 or 5 times, trying it, you know, in different ways. And one of the things that I kept trying to do, I knew I wanted to put myself into it, but I didn't want to write memoir. I didn't want to write nonfiction. I didn't want to write a first-person narrative, but I felt that it was dishonest to leave myself out of that, since it is such a family, you know, story. But I didn't want to appear in there. I wanted to be a character in my own story, and so that's how I came
No
up
one's
with
going
it.
to do it.
Exactly, and I like ghost stories, so that's, real, you know, ones that really, like Beloved is a ghost story, right?
Yeah, although
Those
her
kind of
character was
things.
a little bit, you know, kinder and gentler than Beloved.
Than Beloved.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
How did because your appearance as the granddaughter was kind of I saw it kind of as the consciousness of the family and definitely their conscience. How did your family, have they read the book? How did they react to writing that book?
Well, my mother and father are both gone. So they didn't read it. I'm not sure my father's only surviving sister read it. Because, you know, there's a great long history in the South of indifference. You know, if you don't want to think about something, just ignore it, right? But pretend it's not there, you know, it didn't happen. So when I went to my hometown where this terrible thing happened, you know, to read, I mean, it was just like, oh, how nice, you're here, you know, have some punch. And read it. There wasn't any, you know, come on with your little hobby and see it. So, yeah, they haven't read it. My brother's read it, he liked it. But since they're the only ones left, since he's the only one left, that's nice.
What about your son?
My son's read it or not. His girlfriend has. I have to mention that too. I have to bring that up. I don't know that he has. And he should. Oh, this story, has he read this story? No.
Or the tree for God?
No. Oh, he hasn't read this story. But I don't know if he's read the tree for God. Yeah.
At which point, in your deconstruction or reconstruction of the Tree of Forgetfulness, did you decide to structure the story from the multiple points of view? And how did you go about choosing which point of view to uncover the layers and sequence in which you did?
You know, I don't know if I can remember the exact process. I can say, though, that I love, As I Lay Dying is one of my favorite books ever written. I think it's a great, great book. And you know how that's told from all of those different perspectives that are carrying the story forward. And I knew I needed, that it couldn't, I knew it wasn't just one person's story. So that was one of the deciding factors. Since it's not one, it's a collective story, it needed more than one point of view. But I think the final kind of, arranging of it was one of those things that nearly drove me crazy. It was, which section to put where and which would lead into the other, and trying to decide how I would both tell the story, like weave the story of the event, the killings through there, bring it back around through Howard Amar, and move it forward to some kind of conclusion. That began to determine the different, the structure of it.
Do you feel like it's kind of weird, but do you feel like it's finished? Do you have any well, maybe I could have done this section from a different perspective, and maybe it would have turned out differently? Do you still think about it?
Yeah. Faulkner again, what he said about the sound and how he wrote The Sound and the Fury? He said he wrote the first, the Benji section, he wrote the first section, and he said he got it wrong. He got the story wrong. So then he had to write the second section to try to get the story right. Still didn't get it right. So then he had to write, the third one. So he thought the whole book was a failure, that he had tried to write it 4 different times from 4 different perspectives, and they were all failures. So I think, so if Faulkner can feel that way, I think I can. But I think Faulkner, while we're on the subject, I tried to read the Hamlet. This, you're laughing, but I had to quit. Before I had to quit before I threw it across the room. And it was just, it was like Faulkner, to me, who had listened to his own publicity too much and was, and was just taken with the sound of his own voice for no reason, telling nothing. The beginning of it is great. It's like, oh, this is Faulkner. He's telling a story. This is a great story. And then it just dissolves. It's the kid with the cow. And you don't want to go there. Yeah.
Other than Faulkner, who would you say is probably some of your biggest influences as a writer?
Catherine Ann Porter. I like to think Alice Munro, because I love the way she makes these huge swirling stories that just. Marilyn Robinson, with her, because of her lyricism. But as I said, I mean, I'm reading constantly, so it's really hard to, but those are, I think, are the ones I keep coming back to. Yeah.
You mentioned before you started reading that you moved higher driving down the south. Is that a conscious choice and away, or do you just find yourself moving away from the south?
Yeah, I just find myself moving away from it. I don't have anything else to say. It's, you know. Although I might now I live in North Carolina that's rapidly going backwards into the dark ages again. So I may again, but I'm tired of it. I feel like I want to write about something else. Try something else. And right now I've got a couple projects going. I'm writing about, actually it's a memoir, but it's about my father's experience. My father was a combat infantry commander in the Pacific in the Second World War, and how that seeped into our family life. And he wasn't, he wasn't broken, but he was cracked by that, badly cracked, and it sort of seeped into everything. And so I'm interested, that's some of my assigned subject matter, is war, I think, and the effects of war on families and on individuals. And then I'm writing another one about, I don't know how this got started. I do know how it got started. I saw a picture somewhere, I don't know if it was online or in a magazine or in a paper. It was like, the title was World's Largest Bride, World's Largest Woman Gets Fitted for a Wedding Dress. And it was this 800-pound woman getting fitted for a wedding dress, and she had found a chef to marry. She was going to marry this guy who was a chef who fed her, could keep her fed. So I was talking to my significant other about it. He was a therapist, psychotherapist. And he said, oh yeah, it's a fetish, called people are feeders. There's a whole group, and I went online, and sure enough, it's all out there. It's like, it's men mostly who like to feed women and get them fatter and fatter. So that's what I'm writing. I'm writing about this woman. But I don't think I can make her 800 pounds, because that means you can't really move. I think she's got to be a little, So, who knows what our imaginations are after when they start going down these roads, All I know is that I've taken her so far. She goes to Baskin-Robbins every day to get, an ice cream cone and a sundae. And on this particular day, she has met a blind guy sitting at the Baskin-Robbins. That's all That's what I know. Stay tuned for. But already, and this goes back to you, I like her. I mean, I'm not, I'm not out. I don't want to ridicule her or make, or make that the point of what I'm writing. I really want to understand what that is that makes people do that, and how, what drives people. What kind of hunger do people have that can't be satisfied? So that's, I'm not trying to make fun of her. Yeah.
How do you research that?
It's a lot online. But I also have to look into all kinds of, I'm just getting started. So for me, research, for everyone, for each book, so far back in Street of Forgetfulness, I've got a box for each of the, filled with files and notes and things that I came across. And it's great, isn't it? We're doing research as a fiction writer is entirely different than academic research or anything else. So the first thing I did when I started to write so far back, when I was getting ready to write it, doing the research for it, I went to Charleston, and the first thing I did was look at the newspapers from the summer that I was interested in, just to see what was happening in the city, and then I came across this fascinating, there were in the paper, every issue of the Charleston paper would have a list of the ships that were coming into the harbor and what was on the ship, the cargo that was on the ship. So that led me somewhere else, and I started reading city ordinances. That was the other thing I read, the city ordinance book from 1837. And that led me to medical books, and that led me to everything. I mean, you just take all that in, and then you see where it leads you, and where, I let it take me where I need to go. Yes?
Is there a tipping point, a place where you've gotten all the research that you need to, and you have to start writing it down?
Yeah. Well, for me, usually they were kind of simultaneous, so I'd start writing, and then I'd realize I need to know something about this or that, so I'd go back to Charleston. And the South Carolina, what's it called? Historical Society Library was a fascinating place to me. They just bring you out a box with people's things that they had been given to. So there might be an account book, a series of recipes or something, and all that's just fodder for me. So I was doing both, so it was sort of a complementary process. I always tell my students I'm allowed to make fun of South Carolina because I'm from there. So, and it's not really funny. It's not a funny place, but there's a reason that Jon Stewart has a segment called "Thank You, South Carolina." Which is that we couldn't do our job without you being absurd and doing it. I mean, what kind of place this year? You realize this? So, was it the anniversary of the start of the Civil War, 1861, 2011, was celebrated in South Carolina with a Secession Day ball, with people in antebellum costumes, including state legislators in antebellum costumes, and the NAACP picketing outside, and them saying they thought that was great because it helped them sell more tickets to the, it's just like this defiant ignorance that goes on and on and on. And so maybe it is still my assigned subject. Maybe I will have to. It never ceases to amaze me. Darkest South Carolina. Where it was only a few years ago the Confederate flag finally came down from the State House there. It's an amazing place. Not when I want to live in it, when I want to live again. So, kid, do you think of that? Think of what your assigned subjects might be. It's an interesting exercise. Do it as one of your 10-minute writing practices. My assignment. And another good one is the things I must never write about. And of course, those are the things you have to write about. Right? I'll never go near this. That's the mother lode. Thank you. You all have been great.